Seeds of rebellion. The vast emptiness of space held its breath as the diplomatic cruiser of the Celestial Alliance drifted among the stars, surrounded by 12 colossal Marof battle cruisers. Each warship, painted in deep crimson and edged with black metal, radiated menace like ancient dragons circling their prey. Their curved hulls and spiked turrets weren't just design choices, they were statements of intent, symbols of the Marof's ruthless efficiency in combat. Lieutenant Cashion Halale stood at the observation deck, his green eyes reflecting the crimson hulls of the Marof vessels. Unlike his fellow diplomats who huddled in their quarters, anxiety gnawing at their resolve, Cashion found himself fascinated by the display of power before him. As Rigel's representative and one of the few humans in the Alliance's diplomatic corps, he had a different perspective on intimidation tactics. Quite the welcoming committee, wouldn't you say, Lieutenant? Ambassador Zoran Purdu's voice carried across the deck, his silver hair catching the starlight. The tall, slender man approached with measured steps, his dark eyes studying Cashion's reaction. Cashion turned, a slight smile playing on his lips. They're compensating for something, Ambassador. All this display, all this theater, it speaks of insecurity, not strength. Purdu's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a dangerous assumption, Lieutenant. The Marof have conquered 17 systems in the past solar cycle alone. Their strength is very real. I don't doubt their strength, Ambassador. I question their resolve. Cashion gestured toward the nearest warship. Look at how they position themselves. Perfect formation, maximum visibility, carefully calculated angles to ensure we see every weapon emplacement. They're not preparing for battle, they're putting on a show. The ambassador's face tightened. And you believe this makes them less dangerous? On the contrary, Cashion replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It makes them more dangerous. They're not here for resources or territory. They're here because they're afraid. Before Purdu could respond, the ship's communication system chimed. All representatives to the main chamber. Repeat, all representatives to the main chamber. Contact with Commander Zoran will commence in 15 minutes. The gathering of diplomats in the main chamber reflected the diversity of the Celestial Alliance. 12 planetary systems, each with their own representative, brought together by necessity rather than choice. The Athosians, with their crystalline skin and geometric thinking patterns, sat beside the methane-breathing Krith. The silicon-based Veldari maintained their distance from the water vapor-emitting Aquari. Yet despite their differences, fear united them all. All except Cashion. Ambassador Purdu took his position at the head of the chamber, his composed demeanor masking the tension evident in his slightly trembling hands. The other representatives arranged themselves according to protocol, their faces drawn with worry. Cashion chose a seat at the far end of the table, apart from the others. He could feel their sideways glances, their whispered concerns about the human variable, in their carefully constructed diplomatic dance. Let them worry, he thought. They needed something to distract them from their fear. The view screen flickered to life, and Commander Zoran's face filled the display. His features were harsh, chiseled as if from stone, his eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Those eyes swept across the gathered diplomats, lingering briefly on each face, measuring, judging. Ambassador Purdu, Zoran's voice rumbled through the chamber, each word carefully weighted. The Alliance has summoned us here, yet what I see before me is a room full of frightened beings clutching at treaties like shields. What could you possibly offer that would satisfy the Marof? Purdu stepped forward, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. Commander Zoran, we of the Alliance value peace above all. We come prepared to offer resources, territories, and tributes worthy of your might. The Alliance is vast, with each system willing to contribute to maintain the balance of power. One by one, the representatives began their offerings. The Athosians promised access to their crystal technology. The Krith offered exclusive mining rights to their methane giants. The Veldari proposed shared governance of their silicon-rich asteroid belts. With each offering, Zoran's expression grew colder, more contemptuous. When it was Cashion's turn, he remained seated, studying Zoran's face on the screen. The chamber fell silent, waiting for him to speak, to add Rigel's tribute to the pile of concessions. Instead, Cashion asked a question. "Tell me, Commander Zoran, do you know why Earth never fell to external conquest?" The question hung in the air like a drawn blade. Purdue's face paled, and several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Zoran's eyes narrowed, focusing fully on Cashion for the first time. "Enlighten me, Lieutenant," Zoran replied, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Cashion leaned forward, his green eyes meeting Zoran's dark ones without flinching. "Because every would-be conqueror made the same mistake you're making right now. They assumed that fear would make us weak, that the threat of annihilation would make us compliant. But humans don't work that way, Commander. Fear doesn't weaken us, it focuses us." The chamber had gone completely still. Even the usual background hum of the ship's systems seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "You come here with your warships and your threats, expecting us to grovel and beg. But here's what you don't understand, Commander. Every system you've conquered, every species you've subjugated, they've all taught humanity one crucial lesson: the galaxy is full of predators. And humans? We've spent our entire history learning how to deal with predators." Zoran's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Was it surprise? Interest? Anger? Cashion pressed on, rising slowly from his seat. "You want tributes? Resources? Territory? Here's Rigel's offer, Commander, we'll give you war. Not the easy victories you're used to, not the simple subjugation of frightened peoples. We'll give you a war that will make you question every conquest, every victory, every moment of supposed triumph in your history." Ambassador Purdue had gone rigid, his face a mask of horror. The other representatives seemed frozen in place, their eyes darting between Cashion and the view screen. But Cashion wasn't finished. "Because that's what humans do best, Commander. We don't surrender to predators, we become worse predators ourselves. Every victory you achieve will cost you more than you can imagine. Every world you take will become a battleground that bleeds you dry. And in the end, when you're counting the cost in ships and lives and resources, you'll remember this moment, when you had the chance to choose a different path." The silence that followed was absolute. Zoran's face had become unreadable, his dark eyes fixed on Cashion with an intensity that made several representatives flinch. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lower, almost thoughtful. "You speak with remarkable courage, Lieutenant Halale. Or perhaps it is merely remarkable foolishness." Cashion smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The difference between courage and foolishness often depends on who writes the history, Commander. The question is, are you prepared to pay the price to find out which this is?" The view screen went dark without warning, leaving the chamber in sudden darkness before the automatic lights compensated. For several heartbeats, no one moved, no one spoke. Then Ambassador Purdue found his voice. "Lieutenant Halale, do you have any idea what you've done?" Cashion turned to face the room, looking at each representative in turn. "I've done what none of you were willing to do. I've shown them that not everyone in this galaxy will bow to threats and intimidation. I've given them something they haven't faced in a long time: doubt." The chamber erupted in voices, some angry, some frightened, all of them directed at Cashion. But he noticed something else: beneath the fear and outrage, there was something new in some of their eyes. Something that looked remarkably like hope. As the chaos swirled around him, Cashion's mind was already racing ahead, calculating possibilities, planning moves and countermoves. Because he knew something that neither the Alliance nor the Marof had figured out yet, this wasn't just about resistance or defiance. This was about changing the rules of the game entirely. Ripples of war. Commander Zoran stood motionless before the darkened view screen aboard his flagship, the Crimson Manifest. The human's words echoed in his mind: stirring memories he'd thought long buried. In his 3 centuries of commanding the Marof fleet, no one had dared to challenge him so openly, so effectively. "Your orders, Commander." First Sentinel Kraw's gravelly voice broke through his contemplation. The warrior's scarred face reflected in the black screen, a testament to countless victories. Zoran turned, his crystalline eyes catching the red emergency lights that perpetually bathed the Marof bridge. "Tell me, Kraz, when was the last time someone made you doubt?" The question caught his subordinate off guard. Kraw's ridge-lined forehead furrowed. "Doubt is for the weak, Commander. The Marof do not. The Marof do not doubt." Zoran finished the ritual phrase, but his tone held an edge of contempt. "And yet here we stand, 12 warships strong, unsettled by the words of a single human." "He speaks with the arrogance of his kind," Kraz growled. "Let me lead a boarding party. We'll show him the difference between brave words and no." Zoran's voice cut through the air like a plasma blade. "That's exactly what he expects. What they all expect." He gestured to the stars beyond the viewport. "We've built our empire on predictability, Kraz. Strike hard, strike fast, accept submission or deliver destruction. But this human, he's offering us something different. A challenge? A worthy opponent." Zoran's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Signal the fleet. I want every scrap of information we have on Earth, on Rigel, on Lieutenant Cashion Halale. And contact our agents within the Alliance. It's time we learned what other surprises humanity might be hiding." Meanwhile, aboard the Alliance vessel, chaos had erupted in the diplomatic chamber. Representatives argued loudly, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of different languages as the translation systems struggled to keep up. "This is madness." The Athosian delegate's crystalline form pulsed with agitated light. "We cannot allow a single human to dictate the fate of 12 systems." "Perhaps," the Krith representative burbled through its methane respirator, "we should consider the lieutenant's approach. The Marof have never faced united resistance." "United resistance?" Ambassador Perdu's voice cut through the chamber. "Look around you. We're anything but united. Lieutenant Halale's reckless action has just condemned us all." Cashion stood by the viewport, watching the Marof fleet with calculated interest. He felt Ambassador Perdu approach before he heard him. "A word, Lieutenant." It wasn't a request. They moved to a private conference room, where Perdu's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "Do you have any conception of what you've done? The alliances you've shattered? The treaties you've rendered worthless? Treaties built on fear are worthless by definition, Ambassador." Cashion turned from the viewport. "But I suspect you already knew that." "What I know," Perdu hissed, "is that we had a plan. A carefully orchestrated diplomatic solution that would have preserved lives." "No," Cashion's voice was steel. "What you had was a carefully orchestrated surrender that would have preserved nothing but the illusion of independence. How long before the Marof demanded more? How many concessions before there was nothing left to give?" Perdu's face reddened. "That's not. Tell me, Ambassador, have you ever studied Earth's history? The pattern of appeasement that led to our greatest conflicts." Cashion stepped closer. "Every time we gave in to threats, every time we chose temporary peace over principled resistance, we only delayed the inevitable. And the cost always grew. Earth is not the center of the galaxy, Lieutenant. Your species' history is about to become very relevant." Cashion activated his personal comm unit, projecting a holographic display between them. "While you were all preparing your tributes, I was analyzing the Marof fleet positions. Notice anything interesting about their formation?" Perdu frowned, studying the tactical display. They're not in standard attack positions." "No, they're not. They're in ceremonial formation, designed to intimidate rather than engage." More importantly, Cashion manipulated the display, highlighting certain ships, their shield harmonics are synchronized. That standard protocol for Purdue's eyes widened as understanding dawned. For defending against internal threats. They're more worried about their own ships turning against them than they are about us. Exactly. Cashion smiled grimly. The Marof Empire isn't a monolith, Ambassador. It's a confederation held together by fear and tradition. And tradition. He deactivated the display. Tradition can be challenged. Before Purdue could respond, the ship's emergency alerts blared to life. Red warning lights pulsed through the corridors as Captain Vena's voice echoed through the comm system. All diplomatic personnel to secure stations. Multiple unidentified vessels have just emerged from hyperspace. They're on an intercept course. Cashion and Purdue rushed to the bridge, arriving just as the main display showed the new arrivals. Sleek, dark ships, their hulls adorned with geometric patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Impossible, Purdue whispered. The Shadari are extinct. They were wiped out in the last Marof expansion. Apparently, Cashion replied, watching as more ships appeared, someone forgot to tell them that. The Shadari ships moved with impossible grace, their formations fluid and organic compared to the rigid positions of the Marof fleet. As they watched, a new signal cut through all communication channels. This is High Commander Lasara of the Shadari Remnant. The voice was melodious but carried unmistakable steel. We received your transmission, Lieutenant Halale. The Shadari remember our obligations to humanity. We stand ready to honor the old accord. The bridge crew turned to stare at Cashion, who stood with a slight smile playing on his lips. Even Purdue seemed at a loss for words. Would you like to know what else I was doing while you were preparing tributes, Ambassador? Cashion asked quietly. I was calling in some very old debts. The Marof aren't the only ones who remember their history. As if in response to his words, more ships began appearing, vessels of different designs, different eras, all bearing the marks of civilizations the Marof had supposedly conquered or destroyed. You see, Ambassador, Cashion continued, his eyes fixed on the growing fleet before them, the problem with ruling through fear is that it creates a very particular kind of peace. The kind that's really just preparation for war. The tactical display was chaos now, trying to track and categorize the dozens of ships appearing at the edges of the system. Each one represented a people the Marof had tried to erase, a civilization they had tried to subjugate. And each one had answered humanity's call. Lieutenant, Captain Vena's voice was tense. The Marof fleet, their changing formation. Indeed, the Crimson warships were shifting, their ceremonial display dissolving into something more practical, more threatening. The game had changed, and everyone knew it. They'll attack, Purdue predicted grimly. They have to, now. They can't allow this kind of resistance to spread. No, Cashion replied, his voice oddly calm. They won't attack. Not yet. Because Commander Zoran is intelligent enough to recognize what's really happening here. And what, exactly, is happening here, Lieutenant? The end of an era, Ambassador. Cashion turned to face him fully. For centuries, the Marof have maintained their power through isolation, keeping their conquered peoples separate, preventing them from communicating, from organizing. But they made one crucial mistake. They let humanity join the alliance, Purdue realized, finally understanding. More than that, Cashion smiled. They let us study their history, their tactics, their psychology. They let us see the pattern. And if there's one thing humans excel at, it's breaking patterns. The bridge fell silent as everyone watched the tactical display, where two fleets now faced each other across the void. On one side, the ordered, crimson might of the Marof Empire. On the other, a growing coalition of the supposedly defeated, the allegedly extinct, the thoroughly subjugated. And in between, a single diplomatic vessel carrying representatives of 12 systems who were about to learn that the galaxy was a far more complex place than they had imagined. The next move would determine everything. And as Cashion watched the Marof fleet's lights pulse in what he recognized as their signal for requesting diplomatic communication, he knew that the real game was just beginning. Shadows of the past. The holographic chamber aboard the Alliance vessel hummed with tension as it prepared to host an unprecedented gathering. Representatives from 3 different fleets, Marof, Alliance, and the newly emerged Shadari remnant, were about to converge in neutral space through secure quantum projections. Lieutenant Cashion Halale stood beside Ambassador Perdue, watching as the room's advanced systems calibrated themselves. The ambassador had aged years in the past few hours, the weight of unfolding events evident in the new lines creasing his face. The Shadari remnant, Perdue murmured, shaking his head. All this time, how did we not know? You didn't know because you weren't meant to know, Cashion replied, adjusting his formal uniform. The Shadari understood something fundamental about survival. Sometimes the best defense is to let your enemy think they've already won. The air shimmered as the first projections materialized. Commander Zoran's imposing figure appeared first, his crimson uniform somehow darker, more threatening in the holographic light. Beside him stood First Sentinel Kraz, whose scarred face betrayed barely contained fury. Moments later, the Shadari delegation materialized. High Commander Lasara was everything the stories of her people had promised, tall, elegant, with skin that seemed to shift between states of matter, neither fully solid nor quite liquid. Her eyes, when they opened, were pools of swirling darkness that contained pinpricks of light, like personal galaxies. Lieutenant Halale, Lasara spoke first, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. The debt of ages is remembered. Before Cashion could respond, Zoran stepped forward. What debt? What game are you playing, human? No game, Commander. Cashion moved to the center of the chamber. Simply history. Would you like to know why the Shadari disappeared so completely after your supposed victory? Why there were no resistance movements, no guerrilla attacks, no last desperate stands? The question hung in the air as Lasara's form seemed to ripple with something that might have been amusement. Zoran's eyes narrowed. Because they were weak, Kraz spat. Like all who opposed the Marof. Because they had a promise to keep, Cashion corrected. A promise made 200 years ago, when a lone Earth ship encountered their fleet near the Carina Nebula. The chamber's holographic systems activated, projecting historical images around them. A small, primitive human vessel dwarfed by the geometric magnificence of a Shadari warfleet. The ECS Horizon, Cashion continued. Lost in its first attempt at faster-than-light travel, it emerged in Shadari space just as your fleet began its expansion, Commander. By all rights, it should have been destroyed. Instead, something remarkable happened. Lasara's voice joined the narrative. They showed us another way. While we prepared for our last stand against the Marof, humanity offered us an alternative to extinction. They taught us how to disappear, how to seed ourselves across 1,000 worlds in ways that would be impossible to track or destroy. Impossible, Zoran's voice was harsh. We hunted them to extinction. Our records. Your records show exactly what the Shadari wanted them to show, Cashion interrupted. You see, Commander, while your empire was growing through force and fear, humanity was building something else, a network. Every seemingly independent resistance, every underground movement, every supposedly spontaneous uprising, all of them connected, all of them waiting. The holographic display shifted, showing a map of known space. Points of light began appearing, spreading like a viral infection across Marof-controlled territory. The Shadari weren't the only ones we helped, Cashion revealed. The Krith resistance in the methane clouds of Epsilon Eridani. Human advisors. The Veldari underground in the silicon mines. Human technology. Even some of your own people, Commander. Did you never wonder why certain Marof colonies seemed more independent than others? Zoran's face had become a mask of stone, but his eyes betrayed a growing understanding. You've been preparing for this moment for generations. For 200 years, Cashion confirmed. Since the moment we realized what kind of galaxy we were joining. Every diplomatic mission, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange, all of them opportunities to build connections, to plant seeds. Seeds of rebellion, Cross growled. Seeds of change, Cashion corrected. You see, Commander, humanity learned something important from our own history. Empires built on fear eventually collapse under their own weight. But networks? Networks can survive almost anything. Ambassador Perdue, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally found his voice. The Alliance, were we part of this network too? The Alliance was meant to be something more. Cashion turned to him. A legitimate alternative to the Marof Empire. A proof that different species could cooperate without coercion. But fear. He shook his head. Fear made you forget that. Enough. Kraw's hologram stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that hadn't been projected. You speak of networks and secrets, but the reality of power cannot be denied. Our fleet still stands ready to. To what? Lasara's form rippled again. To destroy us. Like you destroyed us before. How many times must an empire kill its ghosts before it admits that something is wrong with the empire itself? The chamber fell silent as her words resonated. Zoran, who had been watching the exchanges with calculating eyes, finally spoke. You said humanity has been preparing for this moment for generations, Lieutenant. What moment, exactly, did you envision? Cashion smiled, but there was no triumph in it, only determination. The moment when the Marof Empire would have to make a choice, Commander. Not between strength and weakness, not between victory and defeat, but between evolution and extinction. He gestured, and the holographic display changed again, showing the current situation, the Marof fleet, the Alliance vessels, and the growing number of ships emerging from hiding. Your empire is already changing, Commander. Has been for generations, through all the subtle influences we've introduced. The only question is whether you'll guide that change or be destroyed by it. You dare to threaten, Kraz began, but Zoran silenced him with a gesture. No, the commander said slowly. No, he's not threatening. He's offering an opportunity. Aren't you, Lieutenant? The Marof are warriors, Cashion acknowledged. That's not what we're trying to change. What we're offering is a chance to be something more than just conquerors. To build something that lasts not through fear, but through strength of a different kind. Lasara's form moved closer to the display. The Shadari remember what it meant to rule through fear, Commander Zoran. We also remember what it cost us. Humanity showed us another path. They can show you as well, if you're willing to learn. The chamber hummed with potential energy as Zoran considered the words. Centuries of tradition, of ingrained beliefs about power and control, warred with the undeniable evidence before him. And if we refuse this opportunity, he asked finally. Then we'll give you exactly what I promised, Cashion replied calmly. A war unlike any you've fought before. Not against armies or fleets, but against ideas. Against hope. Against change itself. How long do you think your empire would last in such a conflict, Commander? Before Zoran could respond, new alerts flashed across the chamber's displays. More ships were emerging from hyperspace, vessels of designs no one had seen in generations, carrying the marks of civilizations long thought lost to history. Your empire isn't the only thing that's been evolving, Commander, Cashion said softly. The galaxy has been preparing for this moment too. The only question is, are you prepared to help shape what comes next, or will you cling to a past that's already slipping away? The answer to that question would determine not just the fate of the Marof Empire, but the future of galactic civilization itself. And as Cashion watched the conflict play out in Zoran's eyes, he knew that the hardest part of his long-planned gambit was just beginning. Empire's Shadow. The emergency session of the Marof High Command erupted into chaos the moment Commander Zoran's holographic report concluded. The ancient chamber, carved from the living rock of their homeworld's largest mountain, echoed with voices raised in anger and disbelief. Impossible. High Marshal Krovax slammed his armored fist against the obsidian table. These humans have been manipulating us for generations. Us? The Marof? Zoran's hologram stood unmoved in the center of the chamber, his expression carefully neutral as he watched his fellow commanders react. The humans had taught him something valuable about patience in the last few hours. The evidence is undeniable, he stated calmly. Our own records, when examined with this new perspective, confirm everything Lieutenant Halale has revealed. The patterns were always there, we simply refused to see them. Then we should strike now. Another commander called out. While we still have numerical superiority. Crush this rebellion before. Before what? Zoran's voice cut through the chamber like a plasma blade. Before more of our conquered peoples emerge from hiding. Before more of our own colonies declare their independence. The game has changed, my friends. The question is, will we change with it? Meanwhile, aboard the Alliance vessel, Cashion stood in a private conference room with High Commander Lasara, her holographic form casting shifting patterns of light across the walls. You're taking an enormous risk, Lasara observed, her galaxy eyes studying him intently. The Marof could still choose war. They could, Cashion acknowledged. But I'm betting on something your people taught mine 2 centuries ago, even the proudest warrior can learn to bow to necessity. And if they don't? Cashion's hand moved to a small pendant hanging from his neck, a simple crystal that seemed to capture and refract light in impossible ways. Then Protocol Omega goes into effect. Speaking of which, he activated a secure channel on his communicator. Status report. All packages delivered, a voice responded, tight with controlled tension. Sleeping dragons are in position across all major Marof military installations. Ready on your command. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Cashion murmured, closing the channel. He caught Lasara's questioning look. Insurance policy. The Marof aren't the only ones who've learned to play the long game. Back in the Marof High Command Chamber, the debate had taken a darker turn. High Marshal Krovax had moved from denial to rage, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the chamber's blood-red lights. You speak of change, Zoran, but I hear only weakness, he snarled. These humans have revealed themselves as our greatest enemies, infiltrating our empire, corrupting our people with their ideas of cooperation. He spat the word like a curse. Our greatest enemies. Zoran's laugh was sharp and unexpected. No, old friend. They are our greatest teachers. While we fought to maintain our empire through force, they built one through influence. While we demanded submission, they offered partnership. And now. He gestured to the tactical displays showing the growing fleet of emerged ships. Now we see the results. Results? Krovax's voice rose. I'll show you results. He activated his command codes, overriding the chamber's security protocols. This is High Marshal Krovax to all loyal Marof vessels. Execute Protocol Crimson. Destroy the human vessel and any ships that. The chamber's lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. When they returned moments later, every tactical display showed the same message: access denied, Protocol Omega active. What is this? Krovax demanded, trying to reactivate his commands. What have you done? I haven't done anything, Zoran replied quietly. But it seems our human friends left us more surprises. He turned to address the entire chamber. The choice before us is simple: we can cling to our old ways and watch our empire tear itself apart, or we can learn to build something new. You're proposing we surrender to these manipulators, another commander asked, but there was more curiosity than condemnation in his tone. I'm proposing we evolve, Zoran corrected. The humans and their allies haven't just been working against us, they've been preparing us. Every colony we thought we were subjugating, they were teaching. Every world we thought we were conquering, they were connecting. They've given us the foundation for something greater than an empire of fear. And what would you have us become? Krovax demanded. Weak? Soft? Dependent on the very people who've been undermining us? No, a new voice spoke, and all heads turned as First Sentinel Kraz stepped forward. His scarred face was thoughtful, his warrior's stance somehow different. Not weak. Something else. Something. He struggled with the unfamiliar concept. Something sustainable. Meanwhile, aboard the Alliance vessel, the atmosphere had changed. The fear that had permeated the diplomatic chamber had been replaced by a cautious hope as representatives from supposedly extinct civilizations continued to make contact. Ambassador Perdue found Cashion in the observation lounge, staring out at the assembled fleets. "You knew," he said simply. "All this time, every diplomatic mission, every cultural exchange, it was all part of the plan." "Not a plan," Cashion corrected. "A possibility. Humanity's great strength isn't our technology or our warriors, it's our ability to imagine different futures and work toward them, no matter how long it takes." "And now? What future are you imagining for the Marof?" Cashion's reply was interrupted by urgent communications from multiple sources. The Marof High Command chamber had gone dark, tactical systems across their fleet were failing, and strange energy signatures were being detected near key military installations. "Now," Cashion said quietly, touching the crystal pendant at his neck, "we find out if they've learned enough to choose their own future." The pendant pulsed once, sending a signal that would activate or deactivate hundreds of carefully placed devices throughout Marof space, devices that could either cripple their military capability or integrate seamlessly with their systems, depending on the choice they made. Across the void, aboard the Marof flagship, Commander Zoran stood before his own tactical display, watching as his empire's fate hung in the balance. The humans had outmaneuvered them so completely, so elegantly, that he couldn't help but feel a grudging admiration. But as alerts flashed across his screen and more ships emerged from hiding, he realized something else: they had also given the Marof a gift. The gift of choice. The chance to become something more than conquerors, something greater than warriors.